Abbey Clements is a lifelong teacher, a gun violence survivor, and the co-founder of Teachers Unify to End Gun Violence. Abbey, welcome to Circle Back.
Thank you so much for having me.
Abbey, we've known each other for quite some time, and I've always loved working with you. Thank you. And I first met you because you survived the Sandy Hook shooting. I'm going to ask you about that in a moment, but I want to take you back to before December of 2012. How familiar were you as a teacher about the epidemic of gun violence in the United States? Were you concerned about it? Because certainly Sandy Hook wasn't the first. As we know. Talk to me a little bit about kind of your personal sense of safety in the classroom.
That's a really interesting question because in reflecting before this call with you, I was thinking about that. First of all, this trajectory of almost 10 years now post trauma from the Sandy Hook school shooting. And I was thinking because as many, I think survivors of a lot of different traumas, but particularly from gun violence, since I have had the honor of meeting so many survivors of gun violence, there's a very stark before and after. And I think, we kind of after Columbine, there was that oh my God, this can happen in a classroom, but never really thinking that it would happen to your own. And I also remember over the years, there being instances of domestic violence in my classroom that students have dealt with, possibly involving a gun and not, we don't really know. But there was also that existence, but never, I think, really what new teachers experience and teachers every day now, I think, across the country, going into work, think, what would I do in this situation when they endure these drills? They think, would I know what to do? Would I be able to do this? What would happen? How could I protect my students? So I think it's, although I knew there was a possibility, I was aware of gun violence in America. I knew that it could happen in a school, but I think after Sandy Hook happened, it sort of changed the psyche of the teacher. And then, of course, it continues to happen. So,
well, and certainly changed not only, I think, the psyche of the teacher and teachers and students across the country, but I think woke up the country in many ways. You bring up Columbine, April 1999. I remember where I was, which was in homeroom when I learned about the shooting. I think our teacher told us what had happened. And of course, I went home and watched the coverage, a pivotal shooting in American school shooting history. Where were you? Do you remember how you learned about that day?
I actually don't. And I think it just goes to show you, I remember the images. The images will forever be clear in my mind of kids running out. That was pre what you see all the time of people in this chaos where there's any sound of gunfire or what might be perceived as gunfire. I do remember those images, but there was a disconnect, and I think a shock. And I think that's kind of the problem that we have in this country with gun violence. We know it's here. It's just hanging above us, but you're afraid of it, but you don't know what to do about it. And you don't really think it's going to happen to you. And I think that's how I was with Columbine.
I want to talk about Sandy Hook, the shooting at Sandy Hook, but I want to start with you reflecting on the Sandy Hook community before the shooting, because we so much in our national conversation only know it because of the shooting. And I'm sure it's changed. Certainly the shooting has changed the community. So tell me about the experience of teaching there before December of 2012, and then, maybe some recollections and reflections on what you remember of that day.
Newtown, Connecticut is a beautiful, beautiful town. It's idyllic in many ways. And I loved my school, my quaint little beautiful school. And I loved that my daughter would be at my school with me, and that my son would soon come along too. He was little when we first moved here. And there was a beautiful sense of safety and incredible teachers and principals throughout the years. So the before is very green, safe, beautiful winter changes of the seasons, and a sense of safety. I remember one part about Newtown is you would see kids walking down Main Street, like after middle school, it's a big thing to walk downtown. So, the shooting changed the town immensely. It rocked the core of the town. And I would dare to say that it's never been the same. I don't know how it could be the same. The loss, the horror, the sadness, it still looms large, I think, in the town. I think the schools and the teachers, principals and the parents really try hard to, create that sense of safety and to really focus on the beauty of the town. But it's very difficult because parents eventually have to sort of tell their kids what happened here, or kids will find out on their own and they have to figure out how to work that through. So I think it's challenging. There's a history here that's difficult to navigate, I think, as families.
No, it's interesting. And I haven't really thought about this, the kind of re-traumatizing that happens with children in the school district as, I guess, they become of age to understand what happened, right? That there has to be, does the school provide some kind of way of talking about it? Or is it just a burden that the parents have to bear?
It's a burden. And I'm not sure anybody knows how to navigate that. So a lot of times they wait, and the onus of this giant thing is on the shoulders of the moms a lot of the time to figure out like how they're going to tell their kids. Do they wait? And then, we'll get the email panic when a child has said something on the bus, and then they're upset. They don't know what to say. They don't know what to do.
Do you as a teacher feel an obligation? How do you address it as a survivor of the shooting?
These things are so hard because you want to at once shield them from it, but you also want them to know the truth. And of course, that's no place for me. So it's difficult to navigate. As a fourth grade teacher, some of the kids have older siblings, so they know. And there's, especially around the time of the year mark, they'll look at me and some of them will kind of know. And we'll exchange this look like, oh my gosh, Mrs. Clements, like that. Some of them will ask me. Some of them know a little, and then they'll try to ask me questions. And it's kind of uncomfortable because I don't know if they know. So it creates layers of discomfort. And then when Parkland happened, I remember similar, where there was this fear that like, oh my God, the kids again are going to know, and you're not going to tell them, are you? So it's difficult. And I respect it. I understand it's difficult for parents, but I think kids tend to understand hard things more than we think that they do. And they kind of get like heavy stuff, almost better, I think, than adults do sometimes.
And whatever you're comfortable saying about where you were on that day, maybe just in brief to give our listeners some context.
Sure. On December 14th, 2012, I came into work and had a brief conversation in the office. I was actually complimenting a former teacher who was currently at the school about what a great teacher she is because of the rapport that she has with her students. And I was sort of bragging on her with the principal, because I think that's overlooked so often, that principals don't get to hear all these things. So I was talking to her about that. And I walked down the hall with the principal, and I remember holding her. She was holding her iPad, and she continued around to where the horror ensued. And I went into my room, and I knew that we were going to be making something fun for the PTA luncheon. So I wanted to get started right away. So I was trying to get the kids quiet, second grade. And I heard what sounded like metal falling chairs falling. It was a very loud crash. And my brain was trying to tell me that it was folding chairs to protect you. That's what your incredible body does. So you can kind of function and figure out what to do. Thought that's what it was. Poked my head out, realized there was panic, poked my head out of the door. I pulled in a couple of kids who were wandering around bringing attendance and such. Came in, and we went into lockdown, which meant that the kids were like kind of hiding, huddled together where the coats were hanging. It wasn't really a closet, it was just like on the side of the wall. Excuse me. And I had a speaker in my room above a table. And the whole time I was listening to chaos and 154 shots blaring through the loudspeaker. And I wanted so badly to get up on that table and pull it down so that the kids wouldn't be traumatized. But I couldn't. I had to hear. And I was also afraid because I had windows. We had like a courtyard outside my room. And for those people who argue with you and say, oh, you just need a gun, or you just need to know where the exits are. In these situations, you have no idea where the perpetrator is, how many there are, what direction it's coming from. So, I listened to the kids. They were scared. They told me to block the other door. So I did everything they told me. Crunched down, afraid of the windows. And then I tried to distract them because, again, I had thought this is terrible for them to remember. So I read them a couple of books, and I tried to sing Christmas songs with them, and they weren't buying any of it. I even said to them, come on, I'm Jewish, I'm singing Christmas songs. You can sing Christmas songs with me. And they were crying. Some of them were crying. Some of them were like scooching away, and I wanted like everyone like really close by. I just remember this real sense of like needing everybody to be really close. And I was very thirsty. Like your body is just in like panic shutdown mode. And one of my students had a water, and I just remember his little face. He took it out of his backpack and he held it up at me. I must have said I was really thirsty. And we proceeded to share a water bottle, which you never would do. Like, I know it was pre-COVID, but like you would never share a water, like, ew. And we drank from this water bottle. And, after the shots, it was very scary, eerie, kind of quiet. And there was a lot of banging and shouting and yelling and cursing outside my room. I had no idea what was going on. It was terrifying. At one point I had to go out and lock the door on the outside. You know, many rooms now, classrooms, you can lock them various ways to keep that from happening. And then there was the banging of the door. Well, there were people on the roof. And Igor, I thought it had to be a gang of people. Like, how could it be that many shots, you know? And when I heard people on the roof, I was like, and at that point, you know, I was really scared. And one of my students said, "Mrs. Clements, you're shaking." And I was like, yeah, I'm shaking. A little bit scared, but those are the good guys and they're coming to help us. I had no idea if they were the good guys. And that's what I told them it was. And it was, but they were, but I didn't know. And the police then banged on the door and they said, "Open up, Newtown Police." And how do you know? How do you know that's the police? Again, like the kids are telling me what to do, and I did everything they told me to do. And so they said, "Open the door." And I was like, I don't know if I should. I mean, I think I remember negotiating or talking out loud because I was really afraid. And this one woman's voice, it was like several times, and the way she said "Newtown Police," I thought, I gotta go with it. And I opened the door. And, you know, I've been asked many times, like, how did you know you were safe? And I'll tell you right now, I did not know we were safe then, because they didn't know if there was only one person. And so it was like screaming, go this way. And like state police in like ready position with their giant guns. It was so scary. And like, again, like, I think your instinct as a teacher is to protect your kids. So I just wanted everybody with me. And they all just ran because they were running literally for their lives, is what it felt like at that point. And then I kind of don't remember. I don't remember what door I went out. And, you know, and then came the really bad parts of rumors. Then we ran to the firehouse, and I still didn't know where everyone was. I had a few kids attached to me, but other than that, they were running. It was so awful. And I remember the cold air, and like, we didn't have jackets. And I remember looking down, I didn't want to see the police and everything. It was very traumatic. And then it got worse. And you heard there were classes that didn't make it, and it was so hot in there, and the kids couldn't find their siblings. And it was just everything that you know about that day, just from the moment that it started at 9:35 until forever. It just always will be the worst day. And even on the days where, you know, I'm incredibly close with some of my students from that day, and the love that I have for them and this bond that we have, it's just, there's just such a sadness. And it's everything that everyone knows. It will always be one of the worst shootings in American history. And the question is, what are we going to do about it?
It's going to be 10 years, you mentioned, in December. Does it feel like 10 years? Does it feel closer to you than that?
It's funny because I think about this a lot, approaching 10 years. I was even counting the months in the car. You know how things, like big things in your life, it feels like 20 years. It feels like I've aged, you know, a lot more than 10 years, but at the same time, it feels like it was just a few years ago. And especially when, you know, there's another school shooting, or when it's somebody's birthday who's not alive, who was killed that day, it just hits you like, how could it be that long that they've been gone?
I'm wondering how it changed your relationship to teaching, to your profession. And I'd love for you to talk a bit about kind of what drew you to the classroom in the very beginning when you started your career, and how you feel that horrible day altered your relationship to that classroom.
I've been a teacher for 30 years. This is my 30th year. And I don't know, I graduated college. I had no idea what I wanted to do. And one day it just came to me that I wanted to be a teacher. My mother was a teacher. I never considered being a teacher. And I just decided that that's what I wanted. And I'm not 100% sure where that came from, but that was my path. I love being around kids, and I've loved every class that I've had, from the difficult to the sweet and sort of easy. I just find kids incredibly fun to be around and refreshing, and the challenge of like being on your feet every second, the decisions that you have to make and change depending on how they're feeling and how engaged they are or not engaged, how tired they are or how focused they are. So it's been a great career. I've been always very proud of that. What I'm lucky in that I still have that connection to kids. I think there are some things that were harder for me, of course, after the shootings, like, the dedication to the lesson cycle and the planning ahead and all of that kind of, it was difficult to concentrate. They talk about the changes in the brain when you go through a trauma, like many of my colleagues and I went through, and that Parkland educators have gone through, and the Oxford educators have gone through when we talk with them. I mean, it's like, Igor, it's the same. You hear from us, and we all have experienced this brain fog. We can't focus on things. We're listening. The sounds are louder, loud noises scare us. That fight or flight, it becomes bigger. So if there's a fire drill, you just like, it's this stark reaction. I mean, so many school surviving educators have very similar experiences. But I am grateful that I still enjoy the days with the kids. It's very much a part of my awareness, of course, really every day. I mean, it's kind of in your bones, even if it's not, you're not conscious about it, that they're growing up in this country of constant fear, right? Of like a school experience or a college experience or a ride in a subway or going to church, whatever, it's the mall, like that. It does sort of continually break my heart that we're raising kids into this culture of fear. But I am grateful that I am still able to enjoy the events of the classroom day to day.
You mentioned talking to other teachers who survived similar shootings, and I'm wondering if you also have conversations with new teachers, maybe student teachers who are in your school and in your classroom, and how you navigate this issue. Do you share your personal story? Do you give them a sense of the very real danger that sadly in the 10 years since Sandy Hook, almost 10 years, has not abated?
It's so different for student teachers and for new teachers starting out. And again, heartbreaking, but I don't think there's a new teacher who isn't afraid. I mean, there's not any teacher in America who doesn't wonder what it would really be like in this situation. And on the day that Parkland happened, I had a wonderful student teacher who always wanted to be a teacher, who was very, I think, mature and wonderful. I was actually thinking about her today. She was just such a natural teacher. And I remember my back was to the class quite a bit. I was reading something and I said to myself, if there were somebody teaching me, they would say, turn around, you can't put your back to the class. And, but I thought about her today. And I often think back to the day of the Parkland tragedy and how I sort of explained everything. And, you don't want to scare people right off the bat with who you meet. Oh, hello, I happen to, I used to teach at Sandy Hook and this is what happened. And, but sort of everything came out that day. And it happens sometimes, like like I have a paraeducator in my room and it's kind of good to get it out there that I've been through this experience and that sometimes during a lockdown, or if we have a difficult drill, or if there's another shooting, that it does affect me. But it's awkward, and but that's kind of how things were with me after the shooting. About 6 months after that, I became an activist in the gun violence prevention space, and I had to navigate that awkward from there on out, and still do. I don't know who sees what I've been in and who sees me on social media, and I get nervous about what parents might think about my outside activities, but I'm doing it for them. And when I talk about, sometimes I tell the kids I call it volunteering in the community, because I think it's really such a good thing that we don't really talk about the importance of volunteering your time. And I do talk about it with them. I don't tell them what it is, but I say it's for kids' safety. That's what I tend to say.
What pushed you to do this work, right? There's so many teachers, sadly, that have been impacted by gun violence, and very few of them, given the context, actually decide to do this kind of volunteering, either on the state level or on the national level. What made you, join the movement?
Gosh, it's really a great question, because when you think about, the before me and the after me, it's kind of like a typical elementary school teacher in that I didn't really make waves about stuff. I followed rules and I didn't make waves. And I immediately, some of those things changed after I had very clear ideas about what teachers should be able to, it's the flexibility that I thought teachers should have in maybe changing jobs in the district. I was very loud about it. I was asking people to sign letters. I was advocating very specifically. We needed meals, and I was yelling at people. I was like, who are you? I didn't even really honestly recognize myself. And so immediately I think this is an insane thing that happened, and I really have to do something about it. And then, I slowly met incredible people who really wanted to speak to myself and my colleagues. And I slowly realized what you're saying is a lot of people who experience something like this, you have so many things to try to hold on to: your own family, your students, honestly, your sanity, your well-being. We didn't eat for weeks. We were going to funerals. There were spreadsheets, and you're also you're in a classroom with traumatized kids. I mean, this is an extreme experience, but I think people who go through something really hard and grief, we don't even know how to deal with grief. I think in our country, we really just don't honor it. We want to you're good, you're fine. If you need anything, let me know. I'm I'll go back to work. And I guess I just wanted something bigger. And, my daughter at the time was 16 and locked down in the physics class. And for a brief moment of time, didn't know that I was okay. We were always a political family. We paid attention, always voted. We talked about causes and things that are important. But, when I was in college, I went on marches and stuff, but I've never campaigned. I had never campaigned for anybody or held a sign really in my own community or really signed petitions and put myself out there. And I really followed my daughter's lead. She kind of led the family in the activism. And I remember saying to her, like, I will follow you. You start. I remember waiting in the car or even like standing outside the door when she was already starting to make incredible connections and work on change. And it took me a little longer, but not that much longer.
So Abbey, you talk about trauma and the fact that we, I think both in our movement, but also in our national conversation, don't recognize all of its impacts, not just on you as a teacher, as we've discussed your relationship with the profession, with students, but I'm sure in other areas of your life. And I was wondering if you'd reflect on looking back at these almost 10 years. How do you feel you've changed? Or maybe even to ask it a different way, what would you today tell your younger self as you were going through the very beginning of the process of understanding and coming to terms with that day?
It's really interesting that you asked that, because we just spoke with the Oxford high school teachers just a few weeks after their tragedy, and it was as if we were taught. Both Sarah Lerner, survivor of the Parkland tragedy, and I were like, it was almost like we were talking to ourselves or our earlier selves and our colleagues. And so going back into that space is really hard. But I think what I would say to my own self is that it's okay to cry. It's okay to cry a lot. Now, that was my experience and not everybody's, but I cried a lot. And I think I was worried about what that was doing to my children, to my own children. Sandy Hook, the Sandy Hook shooting shook the nation. And there were songs. The songs got me every time I would listen. And it was like, it's not just like the tears. It was like heaving, loud crying, like a lot, because you're holding yourself together for the day. And then you come home. And that was, again, that was like my personal experience. But I think what I would say to myself is that, it's okay and it's good. I kind of knew that, or I thought that, but it would have really been helpful to hear that from someone, which, by the way, we did. We heard from, we did get advice and guidance and sort of like that mentorship from Columbine survivors who met with us in January, right after. I remember it was a terrible snowstorm. I don't even know how they got here. And my husband drove me and waited for me outside. I didn't want to go but I wanted him like right outside the door just in case it was too hard. And some of the things they told me in there, I'm really grateful to hear. And now I will pass on to others. Like, you will probably think about this every day for your life, somewhere in your consciousness, but it won't be, it won't feel the same every time. And it won't, it will go in phases, and even some year marks are different than others, which is such a strange thing. And people talk about that all the time. I mean, people I run in circles with, they're like, this anniversary wasn't as hard for some reason, or this one hit me harder. So I would just say that, trust the process. I was constantly afraid that I would be, traumatizing my own children in the way that I was moving forward in this, but I didn't know how else to deal with it. And I had this sort of hope in my mind. And I would say this sometimes to myself that, like, when they're grown up and they look back at what their mom was like, that they would say, I'm really proud of her, because even though it was so hard for her and that she cried a lot, she went to therapy, she tried all these things, she changed schools because that was the right thing for her, and she became an activist, and that was a real way for her to, try to help make this thing stop. And that helped me.
Well, let's talk about your great activism. I first met you in that role, and I don't remember how we met. Maybe you do. I foolishly do not. Maybe it was at CAP at some point. I imagine it was probably through Chelsea at CAP. But I'd love to hear about what motivates you in terms of the drive that you have and the value add you believe you add to the overall movement, right? In trying to get us to a place with tougher gun laws, a future with fewer guns. Talk to me both about the motivation and what you feel you bring to our movement.
I think, like, anyone working through something hard or towards something big, it's definitely been a journey, and it changes. And I suspect that the advocacy for me will continue to look different throughout the rest of my life, because I can't imagine not doing this ever unless we really change things. Then we don't have to do it anymore, Igor. We could just travel and feel safe everywhere. But I think when that summer after the tragedy, I went to a meeting and I was terrified to go by myself, and I had to go by myself, and I did it. And I immediately found my people. It was both people who've not been personally impacted by gun violence and also survivors of gun violence in one living room of a friend who later became a friend. And I cried there, I spoke there, I told what happened. And it was like an invitation to this really scary thing, but I knew I had to walk right in, and that's just what I did. And I'm grateful for it. And I mean, if I think about the 9.5 years so far, or 9 years, what that advocacy looked like, it's looked like listening to a lot of really hard stories and carrying those stories with me, and never forgetting those family members, and never forgetting the faces of the students who should be alive today from all of these different shootings, and telling stories. I think connecting people, I think in a way that's not just you have to listen to this terrible, terrible thing that happened, but you have to listen to this because you have to help end this. And I think that's where what we've all been trying to work on over the years and have made such progress with. And I think now I see what the teacher voice can be, and the lack of narratives coming from the classroom that are so important, that we're, across the country, kids today were in classrooms who were, they've lost family members to gun violence. They have fear of gun violence walking to and from school. There's threats of domestic violence with horrific, firearms unlocked everywhere. I mean, kids are sitting in classrooms bringing all of this to, right there in that space, and teachers are navigating it beautifully, because that's what we do. We become counselors and surrogate parents, and whatever we need to be to help in these situations. And we just don't hear enough about what's going on. And I think that's because of the nature of teachers, that we care, of course, so much about confidentiality, and we want to protect our students and protect our families, and we feel like it's not our place. But if we could find a way to share what's going on, of course, privately and in ways that are okay and not divulging any private information, but to share what goes on in classrooms with, I don't even think superintendents always know what goes on in classrooms, and our state legislators, they don't know. And so sharing these stories with the state, and then of course with people who are making decisions, bad decisions, for a variety of reasons that are all horrible. But I just think that we don't hear enough from teachers on this issue, and that I'm hoping to help change that.
Well, speaking of hearing from teachers, a couple of months ago, you reached out and said that you and several other teachers who were impacted by gun violence and obviously live with that threat every single day were forming a new organization. I was so excited to hear it because I agree with you that there is just so much possibility in the way that teachers can tell stories, not just about mass shootings, but also about how everyday gun violence impacts the students in their classrooms, that they play such an important voice in ensuring, legislators understand, right? School administrators understand, and frankly, the American public understands the burden that teachers carry. And so you are one of the co-founders of Teachers Unify to End Gun Violence, with the goal of really inserting teachers' voices into our national conversation. Tell me about the group and how you see your role in our movement.
How many times can teachers see on their feeds, that on their social media feeds or on TV, that yet another school shooting has happened, or heard about a horrific shooting at a kid's sporting event? We're seeing now this week a few times, and it's like a loop of these horror stories. And after yet another school shooting, this time in Oxford, Michigan, I was texting in a group text with couple of other teachers, and I said, "This is ridiculous. It's like a hamster wheel." And yet again, have we heard from one teacher about this? Nope, we haven't. And that's it. I said, "Do you want to start a national organization?" And they didn't skip a beat. They said yes. And we formed about 4.5 months ago, and with the intention of raising the voices of teachers and in terms of how gun violence affects them, their students, and their communities, and to make change. The other thing that is very important to us is that we connect with schools who have been impacted, schools and educators who have been impacted by gun violence. And sharing these common stories and common experiences can be so affirming and so helpful when you're feeling maybe alone, when you're the only one in your family who's gone through this and no one's understanding what you're doing. They're like, "It's been, a couple of months now. How come you're upset at this, party," or whatever it is. So it's very important to us that we have these private conversations as well. And we're hoping to also raise these narratives loud and clear so that more, I think, legislators hear from every pocket of the country, every place where gun violence is affecting its people, which is everywhere. Then how could they we allow them to stay in office? So we're very dedicated to this cause of especially elevating the narratives of the experience of educators. I mean, Igor, it's been incredible. We've connected with about 125 educators across the country, and it might not sound like a lot, but we're talking in a very private, personal way where they're expressing their feelings about and experiences about these sometimes horrific drills, but also the need for drills, because I think teachers are so afraid that they feel like they need something, and they're very conflicted, where I'm sure parents are very conflicted with these drills. So they've spoken, I think in a deeper way than I expected about these drills and preparation for possible shootings on campuses. And they've spoken about their own experiences. And it's just shocking. And you're shocked, you're not shocked, and you're angry, but we're hoping to help empower these educators to raise their voices in school board meetings and further, and to help carry these stories, their stories, in a variety of different ways while protecting the identity of everybody involved.
Well, Abbey, I have always been so incredibly grateful for the ways we've been able to work together, for all of the work that you've done over the years, for this organization that you've formed to give teachers a voice, to allow teachers to connect with each other, right? Which feels like an incredibly a missing piece in all of this. And, I can say that what keeps me working in this movement are stories like yours, how people who have are able to overcome incredible trauma to fight for a better and for a safer future. So thank you. Thank you for continuing to inspire me, I think, to inspire so many people across the country. Abbey Clements is a 30-year veteran of the teaching profession. She's a gun violence survivor, and she's the co-founder of Teachers Unify to End Gun Violence. Abbey, thank you so much for your time and for this conversation.
Thank you so much, Igor.